BBOR Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia. BlackBoxNid88 on Instagram for the bonus podcast. And welcome to BBOR, the home of true crime talk radio and your premier destination for unsolved mysteries, criminal psychology, and exploring the dark side of cyberspace. My name is Ned DeHaan, and I am your host, as well as the creator of AstroPsych 400 here on YouTube, and regular contributor to the Zodiac Killer channel. And a great way to support these shows is just by listening to some more content. But you can also go over to Amazon.com and have a look at the book Killer on a White Horse, written by me, Ned DeHaan. It is a novel, murder mystery, inspired by the Zodiac Manson connection, but it is indeed fictional. However, who doesn't love a good mystery? And there is always the TeeSpring page. Feel free to check out some of the merchandise. And remember, being weird is not a crime. Let the show begin. Okay, hello everybody. Today is Friday, another Anything Goes Friday. Welcome to the show. Firstly, I would like to give a big thank you to everyone who has been following the regular segments about the Zodiac Killer on Mondays and Jack the Ripper on Wednesdays. And I would also like to give a shout out to Batman66, who is a member of the BlackBoxOnlineRadio membership program available through BuyMeACoffee.com, and he has provided me with a copy of the book The Strange Ways of Man, Rites and Rituals of Their Incredible Origins. And Chapter 4 of this book talks about the Thuggee cult from India. And I have to introduce today's subject in somewhat of a twisted, roundabout way. But first, I would like to remind you guys that you can hit the like button and subscribe, as well as visit some links in the description box, including one for BuyMeACoffee.com. BuyMeACoffee.com/BlackBoxNid88 allows you to make a donation or contribution to help support the show, and anybody who makes a donation will get a shout-out on Zodiac Monday. And as stated, there is the membership program now, which gives you access to bonus features and bonus content. And I'm going to be doing a members-only podcast at least once a month where I respond to requested topics from the members. So if there's something that you think is a little bit more personal or something that you would not want shared to a public audience, you can perhaps join the membership and we can discuss it in a more private manner. Lots of things available through the BBOR membership. But I said that there was a twisted, roundabout way of exploring the Thuggee cult. I have to go back, let's see, it's going to be 16, 17, 18 years. I forget how old I am. I was actually back in high school at the time, and they were promoting a movie called Primeval, and it was talking about a serial killer named Gustav, and they said that he was the most, not exactly the most prolific serial killer in the world, but he was a serial killer that murdered hundreds of people. And, I mean, that is something that really captured the attention of a lot of people, and we would have conversations about it. And it turned out that it was all just a bunch of hyped-up publicity, because Gustav was actually the name of a crocodile, and it was a crocodile movie. I mean, they made several different movies like this, where, you know how they have, like, Anacondas, of course, a snake horror thriller movie. They had Lake Placid that came out, and, Primeval would be another example. There's one that's just called Crocodile, Mega Croc. Okay, I mean, they have lots of movies like this, but they sort of misrepresented the advertising to try and pull people in, and I kid thee not. One of the ways they advertised the film, they would say, Jack the Ripper, 5 victims, the Zodiac Killer, 6 victims, Gustav, over 300. But in my memory, I actually think it says Jack the Ripper, 5 victims, the Zodiac, 6 victims, and the crocodile killed 300. But the problem with that would be, firstly, I mean, did Jack the Ripper murder 6 people? I don't think so. I've never seen any convincing evidence of that. Did the Zodiac Killer murder 6 people? I have never seen anything convincing of that. The only thing that I can say is I believe that Jack the Ripper murdered at least 5 people. I mean, possibly even 4, depending on some things. As I said, I go through this on Ripper Wednesday. And with the Zodiac, I mean, I think the Zodiac murdered 5 people, definitely, and anything else is just requires a little bit of guesswork and theorizing. But I digress from that for the following reason. We were discussing the movie trailer that we had just watched for Primeval, and the person whom I was friends with at the time asked me the question, who do you think is the serial killer in the world that has the highest body count? And I honestly did not know. So once I got home, I connected to the internet via AOL. You know how it made that weird noise when you would get online using dial-up internet back in West Virginia? And it said that the serial killer with the highest body count was an individual named Thuggee, although I didn't know how to pronounce his name. For years I thought his name was Thuggee, because I was just some kid from West Virginia reading things on AOL. But aside from that, I found that there were 931 murders that had been attributed to Thuggee. 931 murders. And that's become a number that is almost associated with his name. If you were to do any reading on Thuggee, you'll see that people are talking about how he possibly committed 931 murders. But from the beginning, even when I was reading the first stuff about him 15, 16, 18, 28 years ago, whenever it was, it said very clearly that that is just an estimated figure, because the alternative possibility could be that he didn't actually commit 931 murders. He was part of a murderous cult or a murderous gang called the Thuggee cult, and he may have just been present or witnessed 931 murders, and these would have been committed mostly by strangulation. He had a handkerchief with a medallion that would have been sewn into it, and then he would have used that to strangle the victims, and specifically targeting men, where the medallion was designed to be in the handkerchief. It's like sewn in, and it goes over the man's Adam's apple, and it creates an additional amount of pressure, or it's able to execute the person more easily. Terrible, terrible stuff. But the Thuggee cult, just going off of memory, they also had certain tenets to their system of operation. For example, they did not target children. They also did not target musicians. And as previously stated, heavily emphasizing on targeting adult male victims because of that type of handkerchief that would have been used to put pressure on the Adam's apple. I think that even goes without saying. But here's another issue, though, because that was the challenge question that was given to me. Who is the serial killer in the world who has the highest body count? I don't even think Thuggee would count as a serial killer, because with a serial killer on this channel, we use the definition that someone who has committed multiple murders with a period of cooling off or return to normalcy, and murder has to be the primary objective and reason why they are committing these crimes. And as previously stated, this is an example of some older gang activity. I mean, this is gang-related or cult-related activity. It's not purely a serial killer gang or a serial killer cult, because these guys are also committing robberies. They just appears to be committing a wide range of criminal activities, and I don't even think we could say that murder was the primary focus. Now, I could be wrong about that, but that's just my take on the subject, and if you would like to put your idea in the comments section down below, you want to challenge me on that. Do you think Thuggee would count as a serial killer if he's the leader of a murderous cult? And yes, the word thug does come from this type of Indian origin. It comes from the word thug, Thag, and I guess anglicization, if I'm using that word correctly, but from India, and then in English we would, of course, refer to him as Thuggee. There are some other ways to spell his name, because we're doing some cross-linguistic activity. However, I would like to get to the book that had been shared to me by Batman66, and Chapter 4 is called The Murderous Brotherhood of the Thugs. In the records of human villainy, there is no set of worse scoundrels than the thugs. They were robbers, and they were murderers, and they committed their crimes under the influence of religion. I mean, I don't know if we should use the word influence there. That's how it's written. Maybe he means more like the guise of religion. And yet so strange is human nature that these professional stranglers were on their off days decent family men. Oh my goodness, so many things to respond to there. Firstly, it states very clearly here that this is a murderous and robbery-based cult, so that almost certainly shows that murder isn't the only function going on. Now let's be very, very clear. very, very clear. There's a difference between the name serial killer and serial murderer. These people are definitely murderers, and they definitely were murderers, that is, and that they were, definitely committing criminal activities, and yet so strange is human nature that these professional stranglers were on their off days decent family men. I'm not extremely surprised by that because I talk to you guys about a lot of true crime cases here on Black Box Online Radio, and we can see very clearly from countless people in the criminal world, they commit a murder and then they just go on to return to normal life, and they can also be cooling off moments on the night of the killing. There was the woman who stabbed her husband multiple times, and she went into her kid's bedroom, tucked her kid to sleep, and then went back to the other bedroom and started stabbing her husband some more. I mean, you hear stories like that all the time, where people are showing that they have the ability to control themselves. They're just actively choosing not to when they do not believe that they will be punished. I mean, I talk about this a lot at the guide. True Crime Teaches Us to Conquer Toxic People, which you can get if you join the Black Box Online Radio membership. But it is always fascinating to explore how people think. Back to the book. Thug comes from a Hindustani word meaning deceivers, and the name by which gangsters were known in the more southern parts of India. Phansigars, Phansigars, comes from the Hindustani word for noose. Both names altogether are appropriate, since the thugs were adept in deceiving those whom they intended to slaughter, for their instrument of murder was the noose. And as we said very clearly, specifically, it's a type of handkerchief with a medallion sewn into it. For hundreds of years, the thug gang beset the native travelers along paths and trackways of India. There is no knowing when they took their rise, but they were undoubtedly had been operating for a very long time when they attracted the notice of the French traveler Jean de Thévenot, who was in India in 1666. To be very clear, that is specifically directed toward the Thuggee cult itself, as opposed to Thug Baram, who would have been born, well after that. I mean, around 100 years after that. But it's just going to show that this murderous organization, or I don't even know if we should say organization, this murderous cult was going on for quite some time in India. There is no doubt that he had been in mind when he was included in an organized band of robbers. That's talking about Thévenot, the French traveler, and he had encountered them on the road from Delhi to Agra. The cunningest robbers in all the world are in that country, he wrote. They use a certain slip with a running noose, and they cast about it around the man's neck with such skill that they will never fail to strangle him in a trice. They have another clever trick for catching travelers. They send out a handsome woman along the road who has hair that is disheveled and all in tears, and complains loudly of some misfortune which she says has befallen her. Soon she falls in with a sympathetic traveler who happens to be going her way. He enters into conversations with her, and finding her good-looking, offers her assistance. She accepts, and he takes her up to his horse, but hardly has he done so when she throws a snare around his neck and strangles him, or at least renders him insensible, until the robbers in the gang, who have been lying in hiding, come running up until they can give the finishing touches to what she has begun. Now, I mean, I think things like that happen even to this day, and to the credit of this book here, The Strange Ways of Man, I'm sure it's not acting like this was something exclusive to the Thuggee cult, but you hear about all types of scams like that. Even, I remember watching shows like Dateline and 2020 growing up, and they talk about distraction scams, where some people, pretend to, be in trouble so someone then can run by and steal their wallet. Of course, those aren't murderous cults or anything like that, but yes, these types of distraction scams happen all the time. And back to the book, this is actually something that is left in very strong quotations. The thugs themselves profess to trace their origin back to the time when the gods lived on earth among men, and in proof of their claim to immense antiquity, they pointed to the sculptures in the great rock temples of Ellora, or so they claimed, and to include the figures of representations of thug operators going about their business. Look, they would say, there is someone sitting on that same mat with the traveler that has the design, only worming out his secrets and trying to gain his confidence. Over there, stranglers are at their deadly work, and in the corner you may see a corpse being dragged to the grave, which is being dug for it by the sexton thug, with the sacred pickaxe. Alright, so another immediate response. Do you see what I mean when I was saying that it's under the guise of religion as opposed to the influence of religion? I mean, people are just seeing what they want to see, and they are cherry-picking to get a desired result, interpreting to get a desired result, intentionally bastardizing something for their own selfishness. And yes, that statement came out exactly as I intended, although I didn't know I was going to intend to do it in that exact manner, strangely. But that's what's happening. That's what's happening. I mean, people are just using something to support their own needs. And also, it should not be underestimated the concept of punishment when you have this group that is very stealthy or very powerful or very dangerous. They know that they are going to be able to keep committing these types of crimes, therefore they do so. And there are different components to human nature, because let's think about that initial paragraph about so strange is human nature that someone's going to commit murder or commit multiple murders and then go back to family life. There is a very dark and violent side of nature, but it gets explored a lot when people believe that they will not be punished. I mean, even at the example of the Nazi soldiers torturing people during World War II, and then the defense was just that they were following orders. They were ordered to do so. They were commanded to do so. And it's not only the Nazis. It happens with wartime events all the time, and they just say that, well, they were ordered to do so. And when people believe that the blame is not on them, there is a higher tendency to create human violence. But I don't want to underestimate this concept of punishment, because I was watching a recreation of a study that had been done. I want to say it was at Stanford, but no, not Stanford. That was the prison experiment. No, it was done like at one university where they would have people answer phone calls, and they wanted to pay attention to how hard do they slam the phone down. Back in the days when we had a phone with a cradle and a receiver and like one of those old-fashioned phones. So they're just making phone calls, and then they don't know that people on the other end of the line are going to say things to make them angry, and how hard are they going to slam things down? And they found a very interesting conclusion, and that is that both men and women use physical force at the same levels, if not one more than the other. I mean, but roughly, men and women use the same levels of physical force when they believe that they will not face punishment or repercussions for their actions. And this, I think, is a perfect example of it. I mean, one study doesn't prove anything, but it's an illustration of a point that these people are being very violent and dangerous and then going back to family life because they believe that the blame is not on them. Maybe they're blaming religion. Maybe they're blaming somebody like Thuggee. I mean, as long as it's not their fault, they will do terrible things. Back to the book. What is most surprising is that the British were in India for nearly 200 years before they even realized that such a race of marauders were in operation in their midst. Up to 1799, they seemed to have known nothing of the thugs, but in that year a number were captured in Bangalore. Even so, however, they were treated as ordinary bandits. The first definite information concerning the Thuggee cult was not obtained until 1807, when a thug gang was arrested near Arcot. More information came a year later, when the bodies of some 30 thug victims were recovered from wells in which they had been thrown. So, I mean, they were arrested and treated as bandits. Well, here's something to remember. They were bandits. This just sounds like a gang of bandits. Maybe it was a little bit larger than other gangs of bandits. Maybe it was a little bit more deadly than other gangs of bandits. But yes, these people were bandits, and they were doing things that were very similar to the way a gang of bandits works, a gang of outlaws, if you will, going back to the days of the Old West. The issue with this one is it seems like they were much more murderous, much more villainous, but at the same time, robbery does appear to be a very big motive in their actions. But even when the authorities had come to learn of the existence of the Thuggee organization, it was some time before they were able to bring any of the miscreants to justice, with the reluctance of witnesses to give evidence for fear of reprisals. Oh yeah, we see this all the time. I mean, even back in Jack the Ripper with the murder of Emma Smith, who is often cited as the first Whitechapel victim. Now, I don't personally believe that she was murdered by Jack the Ripper. Most people don't either. Maybe the Inspector Walter Dew did, and he is perhaps mostly by himself. However, she was murdered by multiple attackers in 1888 in London, and attackers most likely from a London street gang, but she refused to provide any evidence for and against her killers, because she was in the hospital and she was passing away, and the theory is that people think she thought she was going to live and she was afraid of reprisals. This is just how people operate. I mean, we're talking about people who are just sneaking around dark alleys. We're talking about a group of people who have lookouts and snitches and all of these things. It happened all over the world and still happens to this day, although the only thing that is different in the 21st century is we have a much more expansive form of media. We have things like closed-circuit television, surveillance cameras. We also have social media where videos can be shared very easily. And really, I always go back to that quote that I heard on an episode of Dr. Drew, of all places, when they were discussing about how it represents a very dark and violent side of humanity that's always been there, but it's just because of things such as the media and social media, video production, and the ability to share videos and photos so easily that we are now learning about it. So I think that that's exactly what's going on with all of this here. But I'm going to go back to the book. Like all of the callings to India, the trade of the thug was mainly hereditary, and children, both boys and girls, were initiated into it from a very early age. The greater number of Muslims, a sort, but Hindus especially, and Rajputs were generally associated with them. They managed to escape detection for so long because, on the face of it, they were peaceful villagers, good husbands, fathers, and neighbors, going about their daily life and cultivating their little patches of crops and tending their cattle. I mean, why is this a surprise? Why is this a surprise? I know I said that I thought that Thug Baram or any of these thuggies were not serial killers because of the definition, but that's just a label. That's just phraseology. What it sounds like is the exact same type of behaviors that we see with serial killers. The exact types of behaviors that we see when we're dealing with people who commit murder and they return to normalcy. They commit crimes and then they can put on a facade. Even if you're going to be dealing with somebody like a spree killer such as Charlie Starkweather and his girlfriend Carol Ann Fugate, who committed a very large crime spree in the late 1950s, the whole ability to just be in murderous rage at one moment, but then at another moment just putting on the calm, deceptive face, trying to deceive people into thinking that they're non-threatening. Well, if they have the ability to do that, then they have the ability to do that. They are in control of their mental faculties, and they are showing indifference to human life because for some reason they have decided that they want to murder people and not feel anything. And also, I need to go back to some episodes of Meet, Marry, Murder, the show that was hosted by Michelle Trachtenberg, and it talked a lot about why would people be driven to commit murder, or even more intensely, how do people create a scenario when they have committed a murder but they don't want to get caught. And that was the program that said that when people make 911 calls after committing murders, they often will be more frantic, more excitable, more hysterical, louder. They'll just be continuously crying and screaming. Whereas when people are actually innocent, they will often have fluctuating moods because they're not trying to put on the facade that they're just intensely shouting all the time or intensely crying all the time. And I think that's a very strong point. But where am I going with this? What am I trying to tell you? That these people are acting. It's the ability to act and manipulate people with emotions. It's the ability to deceive people with emotions and a facade. People are in control of their mental faculties, and then they go on to commit very heinous and murderous activities when they don't think they're going to be punished for it. But some final concluding notes, though, about Thug Baram would be that he was executed for his crimes, but he was executed in secret, and I think that there's a very high chance that he wasn't actually executed. Anytime I hear something about how there is somebody who was executed but there were no witnesses, or then there was no burial of the body done in any public way when anybody saw this happening, except some unidentified workers were responsible and we just don't get to know who they are. I am a conspiracy theorist to an extent, and I immediately turn toward the possibility of, okay, yeah, that was a lie. This guy cut a deal. He probably snitched on some other people and they let him go, and that he was maybe not even executed at all. That's my personal take on the subject, but if you'd like to challenge me on that, you can put your ideas in the comments section down below. I would love to read them. And I would like to go to a concluding paragraph in the book, The Strange Ways of Man, that is going to talk about the Thuggee called after the execution of Thug Bahram. This was at nearly the end of the history of the thugs. For hundreds of years they had practiced their dreadful trade with near impunity, and justice had been long in bringing them to the book. But it is impossible to determine the number of their victims. It was eliminated that in the early years of the last century... it was estimated that in the early years of the last century, thugs were strangling 1,000 or 1,500 persons annually. Then Lord William Bentinck came up with the scene, and Captain Sleeman. Between 1826 and 1835, more than 1,500 thugs were put on trial, and of these 383 were hanged, and most of the rest were transported or imprisoned for life. Even after the stranglers had been suppressed, cases were reported of thugs murdering with poison by 1848, and after that the Thuggee cult was extinct. There were a series of challenge questions that I would like to explore with you guys, and one of them is, do you really believe all these stories about the body counts, or that they're actually murdering this many victims? Because other things that people do is they will take things to extremes, blow things out of proportion, misrepresent details. I completely accept that the Thuggee cult was very murderous, that they had their reasons why they believed that they were doing something acceptable. As I said, they had their own tenets, they had their own, bastardization of ideas, as I said before. I believe that they definitely murder people. I don't know if it's true to this extent. It's possible, though. I mean, if things aren't documented, who am I to say that it's impossible? But I also am somewhat skeptical because I've learned how certain true crime stories can evolve into legends as time goes by, and certain details can get misrepresented. And as far as Thug Bahram, I tend to believe more of the skeptical side, that he didn't actually murder 931 people, that he was only present at 931 murders, if that is even true. I mean, it could be less, it could be a little bit more. As I said, it's not like people are keeping the most reliable records. What's estimated with Thug Bahram is that he murdered perhaps somewhere in the low hundreds of people himself, which is still terrible and heinous. But I would really like to know your response to my challenge question. Do you think that would make him the most prolific serial killer in the world? Do you think that the actions of the Thuggee cult meet the criteria for being a serial killer? I stated very clearly that I thought they didn't, because I think that this murder should be the primary focus when using that term, and it's not the most important discussion in the world. It's simply just trying to organize all of these true crime stories. But I would love to know your response to that challenge question. If you think I'm completely wrong, well, write out your idea in the comments section down below. Maybe it'll be used in a future episode of Black Box Online Radio. And as always, we can discuss this as long as we keep things somewhat civil, and anybody can write the show at blackboxonlineradio@aol.com. You can also get me on Facebook. My personal Facebook is in the description box, and there is always BlackBoxNid88 over on Instagram, and I will see you over there. Until next time.